Hey, I wanted to discuss food drive and how we use food with our dogs as reinforcement and also motivation when we're training them. So, food drive essentially is how motivated is your dog to work for food when you guys are working together. And there's some things that we can do to build food drive if you don't have a dog that's highly motivated by food. So, food essentially is a really, or should be, a really, really high value resource that your dog wants access to. If we look at food as currency for our dogs and use it in a manner of when we're in a training session, your dog is working by performing certain behaviors that you're asking for. In exchange, they're being paid with food. So their desire to access that resource is what is going to push that drive and push your dog's motivation to perform these tasks for you. So we run into certain situations with dogs that aren't motivated by food, and it's generally a couple different things. So one is that your dog may be satiated, right? Your dog might be overfed and therefore he's full. So his want to necessarily access more food in exchange for performing certain behaviors, he might not be very motivated to do so. He's full. So that resource really takes a back seat at this point. It's not something that he is going to work very hard to obtain. Another issue is when we do something called free feeding with our dogs. And free feeding is when we put down a bowl and we fill it to the brim with food and we just put it down for our dogs and allow them to graze throughout the day. This is essentially like putting $1 million in your dog's bank account, right? So if we look at your dog's food as currency and compare it to us having $1 million in your bank account, how willing are you to be motivated to go to work if you have access to all of this money anyway? Same thing goes for our dogs. That bowl of food is that $1 million in the bank where they have access to that resource whenever they want it, and they're not going to be very motivated to work to get it because they have it already. So another thing that happens as well is when we free feed our dogs is that the level of resource that we are now going to use when training them really has to skyrocket, right? We really have to compete with the fact that they have all of this food already. We need to come out with the big guns. So again, comparing it to us having a large quantity of money in our bank account, if you have $1 million, how willing would you be to go to work for minimum wage? Not likely. For you to actually be motivated to go earn more money, that number is probably going to have to be really high that you get in return. So it's the same thing with our dogs. They have this food. You're going to have to pull out something really, really great for them to be like, well, that's not something that I get very often. And you're going to find yourself in this situation where you're constantly chasing these levels of reinforcer for different situations. And you constantly hear people pulling out, the stinkiest, smelliest, stickiest, whatever, that their dogs go like bananas for in order to get them to do things. And this can lead to GI upset, stomach trauma, all that kind of stuff, especially if it's not things that your dog is normally used to. And we're in training sessions and we're stuffing them full of these treats, if you will, outside of what they normally get. And a lot of times it's met with some sort of, consequence as far as upset belly, diarrhea, all that kind of great stuff that goes along with that. So essentially your dog should be working for their meals and learning that access to their meals comes in this fashion and it comes in these training sessions. So what we can do is use our dogs' meal times. If we break up our dogs' meal times to morning and evening, we can use these moments as training moments, right? So take out a little bit or the whole meal for that matter, depending on how much time you have, and run some drills with your dog. Your dog is learning that by doing these drills and performing these behaviors that you're teaching is how they're learning to access this food resource that they essentially need to survive. So it becomes becomes very high on their list of priorities. And therefore, their motivation and their drive to perform these behaviors for the food also becomes very high on the list of priorities. So using your dog's meal times as training sessions, that gives you 2 training sessions a day at minimum. And that's a good amount of work to put in daily with your dog. These little, sessions, it doesn't have to be anything crazy long, but you're feeding your dog anyway. Your dog might as well be performing some tasks in order to earn that currency that you're giving them. So another thing that we can do as well is keeping our dogs a little bit hungry. So cutting back on their rations a little bit and using that extra food to do training sessions, or to even work your dog throughout the day, or holding on to it so when your dog does do something that you really like and you want to have repeated, that's a moment where you can reinforce them with this additional food that you have. So dogs are either going to work towards something or they're going to work to avoid something. And manipulating those things is what is going to allow us to train our dogs and teach them appropriate behaviors. And using food and using their drive to access this food is a really great method of positive reinforcement, where your dog is going to work towards that goal in order to access this resource that you have. And when they learn that by performing these behaviors and these tasks are the only ways to get access to this resource, you're going to have a really, really open communication with them as far as you do a job and I pay you. And that's essentially what you're saying when you're giving your dog food as a reinforcer. So just remember to keep your dog's motivation for food really high, and the drive that you're going to get back as far as performance in behaviors and training sessions is also going to skyrocket. And you're going to have a much better method of communicating with them. And they're also going to realize that you hold value as well, because you are the one that allows them access to these resources as well. So that's also in turn going to give you tons of value in your relationship with your dog. So food, super important. Learn to use it correctly, and don't let something as valuable as food be something wasted in your relationship with your dog by just allowing him access to it whenever they want. All right, hopefully that helps. See you later.